If you're considering relocating to Florida and are deciding between Tampa and Orlando, or are just curious about how these two cities compare, then this video is for you. In this video, I'm comparing Tampa versus Orlando and talking about things like amenities, the job markets, the housing markets, the cost of living, how these things compare in these two cities. And at the end, I also talk about the really annoying thing I've noticed that Orlando has that Tampa does not, that no one seems to be talking about. So be sure to stick around till the end for that. By the way, I'm Shae Green with Impact Realty Tampa Bay, and on this channel, I talk a lot about moving to Tampa Bay, the pros and cons of living here. So if you have any questions about the Tampa Bay area or the real estate market here, I'd love to help you. Go ahead and give me a text or an email. So I recently was working with a buyer who found me on YouTube. They watched my videos just like you and reached out, and they were deciding between moving to the Tampa Bay area and the Orlando area. And it just got me thinking that for a lot of people who maybe work from home or are still hunting for jobs, you might not have narrowed down which city you want to live in Florida. So I wanted to compare the two cities. And for me personally, I actually moved to the Tampa Bay area without having a job lined up yet, so I definitely was considering moving to Orlando as well. So in this video, I'm sharing the pros and cons and the thought process that I went through before deciding to move here, and then I also look up different statistics and show you a comparison between these two cities. So let's get right into it. So how do the amenities compare between Tampa and Orlando? So there are so many things to look at. I want to start with things to do. So of course, Orlando is known for the theme parks, and it really cannot be beat out of any city in the world probably when it comes to theme parks. So if proximity to theme parks is a really high priority to you, then it makes total sense that you would want to live in Orlando. But for me personally, this was actually one of the cons and one of the reasons why I ultimately decided not to move to Orlando. Because although I love theme parks, I felt like Orlando was a little bit one-dimensional in that way, where a lot of the city revolves around Disney and the other theme parks. And I felt like Tampa just had a little bit more diversity of things to do, a bit more history, and a bit more culture. And then Tampa, of course, has the world-class beaches, which was the total deciding factor for me because having amazing beaches just down the street really can't be beat. And living in Tampa, you still can easily go to Disney for the day or spend a fun weekend in Orlando. And similarly, if you live in Orlando, you can do a beach weekend in Tampa. But when it comes to city life, I think Tampa definitely beats out Orlando in that the Tampa Bay area has the city of Tampa and it also has the city of St. Petersburg. These cities are only about 30 minutes away from each other. They both have amazing downtown scenes, amazing dining, and quite a bit of history, art, and culture. And that's not to say that Orlando doesn't have a great downtown, but overall, I think the options that you have in the Tampa Bay area are a little bit more diverse because you have these two cities to choose from. But when it comes to shopping, Orlando definitely beats out Tampa, especially with malls and outlet stores. Most people prefer to go to Orlando for shopping versus Tampa just because there's way more shopping options and more outlet malls. But when it comes to entertainment, personally, I think Tampa beats out Orlando, partially because of what I mentioned about Orlando being a little bit one-dimensional when it comes to the theme parks, and Tampa being close to the water. There is just so much to do with all kinds of water sports. So if you enjoy the outdoors or the water, the beach, then Tampa is definitely the option for you. And in addition to that, when it comes to professional sports teams, Orlando obviously has the Magic, but Tampa Bay does have the Rays, the Bucks, and the Lightning. Not to mention a ton of MLB spring training games as well, so I do think Tampa has Orlando beat in that department. Next, let's talk about the weather differences. So these cities are really close to each other, so the weather is pretty similar between the two of them. You're in Florida, so it's going to be hot and humid in the summer, But in the Tampa Bay area, you do get the breeze coming off the Gulf of Mexico, which does help. And there's a noticeable difference, in my opinion, between the heat and humidity between the two cities. I think that Orlando feels a little bit hotter just because the Gulf kind of cools down Tampa a bit. And when it comes to traffic and overcrowding, both cities do see a lot of tourist activity. Both cities can have a lot of traffic, especially during busy touristy seasons. However, I personally think the tourist crowds and the Disney traffic in Orlando is much worse than the traffic in Tampa. And that leads me to talk about the job market. The job market between Tampa and Orlando is pretty comparable, but occasionally, depending on what data you look at, Orlando is a little bit faster growing of a job market than Tampa. And in Orlando, the tourism market is a little bit stronger than Tampa's just due to Disney and the theme parks and the opportunities that there are there. But then Tampa's job market is a little bit better when it comes to healthcare and finance. So it really just depends on what industry you're in and what kind of jobs you're looking for. And next, when it comes to the housing market between these two cities, it's really comparable. In the past, Orlando has been a little bit more expensive for homes than Tampa, but in the past several years, Tampa has gotten more expensive. It really depends on the specific areas that you're looking at within the Tampa Bay area or the Orlando area, but homes in Tampa are getting slightly more expensive, but rent actually is typically slightly cheaper in Tampa versus Orlando. And that leads me into the overall cost of living. According to the cost of living calculator that I use all the time on NerdWallet, which I will link actually in the description, Tampa is actually slightly cheaper than Orlando when it comes to living here, but only by about 3%, which to me just means that it's basically equivalent. So I wouldn't let the cost of living be the main factor in determining where you choose to live. And cost of living varies so wildly based on your lifestyle and where exactly you want to live in these areas. Okay, let's talk about safety. So according to the crime statistics, Tampa is generally safer than Orlando. And I can just say from my personal experience, I've seen that as well. I do feel a bit safer in the Tampa Bay area versus when I've been in Orlando. And that's just my opinion. I just feel like Tampa is a little bit nicer and safer, but it really depends on where you're at within the Tampa Bay area. Overall, both of these cities have so much going for them. It really just depends on what you're into, if it's the theme parks or more the beaches and the water sports. For me personally, I just think you cannot beat these amazing beaches like Clearwater Beach, Honeymoon Island, St. Pete Beach, the list goes on. And that is the number one reason why I moved to Tampa, so that I could go to the beach whenever I want and see dolphins on my lunch break. You really can't beat that. But I did want to mention the thing that actually bothers me the most about Tampa versus Orlando. Orlando's airport is bigger than Tampa's, and I'm originally from out west, and I have a lot of family in Utah and in Montana, so I fly back there multiple times per year, and it's actually really frustrating because the flights from Orlando to Montana are so much better than the flights from Tampa to Montana. So sometimes I actually will drive to Orlando to take a flight. It's been really annoying and something that I didn't expect, but that's just something to be aware of. I think a lot of the best flight routes end up going to Orlando versus Tampa. If you're more likely to travel along the East Coast and the central United States, there's typically not a major difference between those two airports. And in fact, the Tampa airport is so much easier to navigate. So I do prefer that airport, but unfortunately, the flight routes are just not as great to Tampa versus Orlando. Okay, so that concludes this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that helped shed a little bit more light on the differences between Tampa and Orlando. And as always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks. See ya.